Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my Unhealthy Podcast. I'm your host, Uncle Marv, and today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to because we're diving into something that affects every single one of us, but most of us don't fully understand, and that's our own biology. My guest today is Len May. He is the co-founder and CEO of EndoDNA, where they're using genetics, epigenetics, and AI to help people better understand how their bodies actually work. Len, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Now, that sounds all fancy and stuff, so what's the way that you water it down for the regular person like me?
But, it's not only the regular person like you. I was surprised to learn that doctors don't really understand genetics either. They took a course in, medical school or in college, and that was it. So, and they understand, that we get half our DNA from our father, half from our mother, and they understand that there's 4 letters, a C, a T, an A, and a G. Those letters are nucleotides, and they make up our own unique genotypes, and that DNA is binary. It speaks in ones and zeros. But that's about it. So there's a couple different things that I try to explain to people that everything I just said is correct. 50% for our mother, 50% for our father. But the thing that I think we don't understand clearly is that your DNA is just it's just an encoding, a signaling. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have these predispositions of this encoding. It just means that you are predisposed to that. So you have this code within you. And what you do, action that you take, actually turns those switches on or off. So like an analogy I like to use in the beginning is like, maybe it's a big circuit breaker box. And when we're born, we have maybe 20 to 30%, depending on who we are, of those breakers turn on. So things like, our hair color, eye color, skin color, those kind of things, they're in the on position. So some of the other things that we have that coding for, they get turned on based on lifestyle and other things in our environment. So the main things that are responsible for that are the food that we put in our body. So how we eat, what we consume, how we utilize our nutrients, those turn those what's called genetic to epigenetic expression, those switches on, or sometimes off, because sometimes we don't want those things that we are predisposed to be turned on, like things like cancer, for instance, or other conditions or diseases. The second thing is exposure to heavy metals, pesticides, plastics, microplastics, all these different things, they can actually affect epigenetic expression based on our genetics. And the third one that I think people don't really think about, and doctors don't think about, is our own neurochemistry. And what I mean by that is the expression of our own cortisol and other different neurochemicals that are expressed at the time that they should not be expressed. So it's sort of this domino effect. You're excreting a neurochemical and it turns on an epigenetic expression of something you're predisposed to, and then you have an adverse event. And what I like to kind of explain to people is your DNA is sort of your GPS of life. So my analogy is I live in Los Angeles, but I'm from Philly. So I can get into my car and I can drive from LA to Philly. Now, I can use my old school method of the map that we used to fold and never knew how to fold it back correctly.
The Rand McNally maps.
And I'll drive and I'll look at that and I'm going to hit some potholes along the way. Best case scenario, I'm going to hit some traffic jams, some wrong turns. I'm going to get lost. I'm going to get there eventually, but there's a cost associated with that. Now, we cannot afford to have, potholes and wrong turns when it comes to our health. So when we turn on our GPS, I can go from LA to Philly without hitting some of those roadblocks or closed roads or traffic jams, because my GPS will tell me what's going on, so it can avoid me stepping into those things or driving into those things. So that's kind of how you got to look at your genome as sort of your guide and GPS of life.
Okay. So you said a lot there. So let's try to dissect a little bit of it, because I think for the most part, most of us still understand DNA to be what we see on those CSI shows, and where it was just used to identify who you and I were, and the fact that, DNA is specific and cannot be duplicated. Now, we do understand that the things that you mentioned about cortisol and stuff like that, we understand those to be chemicals and parts of our body, but never understood them to be DNA related.
Mm.
And it sounds like a lot of this is stuff that's been studied and is just now coming out for, us to kind of start to understand. And we know that DNA has been linked to, can we clone things using our DNA? Can we, take out, bad genes before a child's born and stuff like that? All things which don't want to get into the the ethics of that or anything, but these are all things that we're exploring. But you're talking about them now, in a neurochemistry type of way of affecting us physically based on how we live, how we eat, how we treat ourselves. Does that sound right?
Yeah, correct. And all the things that you mentioned,
Okay.
which are a lot of complicated things, they're all part of the same thing also. So when we map the genome, we now start understanding, all right, well, these genes, and then within those genes, there's some called single nucleotide polymorphisms. These are, or SNPs. They have a specific association with a function. So these are the coding that we have. And what happens is that information goes to the cell, and that cell, the DNA, tells it to produce a protein. That protein then creates an action within our bodies. So everything is kind of going into this figure eight. There's a signal, there's a switch, it turns on that switch, it does something within our bodies, and it continues to feed back and all those things that I just mentioned, you just mentioned. Now, the challenge is, what do we do with that information now that we received it? And using AI, it makes it much easier for us to be able to interrogate the genome and ask specific questions of what personalized individuals need. Now, as far as what you were talking about, cloning and all that other stuff, there is gene therapy. So now that we have the genome, we understand that there's diseases in certain conditions, even in an embryonic state, that we can see, like Down syndrome, sickle cell, and all these different conditions that are genetic, that with gene editing, we can go in, remove that extra chromosome, or remove that genotype, and take out, an A, replace it with a C or something like that.
Okay.
So this is possible. We can do that. And you're right. There are ethical concerns about that. Now, how far and wide does it go? I mean, you can make a perfect human, whatever that definition is. Now, in the United States, we have guardrails for that. We're not doing that. Now, in different countries, they don't have the same guardrails. So they are looking at that. I was talking to somebody I know who had their dog cloned. So now they have puppies that are the same as the mother and all this other stuff. They look identical. Personalities are a little bit different, which is that nature versus nurture. So it's going on in different parts of the world right now. But what we're focusing on is not to do gene editing, which there is a lot of different therapies and gene therapy. What we're looking at is, what do we need to know about ourselves personally so we can prevent conditions or disease from turning itself on? And when we give this as a tool to doctors, we're starting to practice real preventative healthcare instead of the sick care system that we're all forced to be a part of based on big pharma, insurance, and everything else that is happening in the United States. So when your doctor actually, or your healthcare practitioner actually understands what your genetic predispositions are, they may be able to get ahead of some of these challenges before they actually turn themselves on.
Okay. So let's set aside all of the talk about the cloning and all of the things that we can do, at birth, what we can see in the embryonic stage. Let's talk about us as fully human adults. We're at a point where a lot of that stuff's already been determined. We are who we are. But from a health standpoint, what are the types of things that we can do, or what can we even understand with our DNA that we can, I guess, in a sense, fix ourselves? Are we at that point yet where we can literally fix ourselves based on the DNA?
It's not only fix ourselves, it's prevent those things from actually happening to us in advance. So it's really practicing healthcare. So I'll give you a few examples. Let's say, so my company does genetic sequencing and analysis and all that stuff. So you would swab the inside of your cheek, you would register it for HIPAA, we're GDPR compliant. It's treated just like a health record with your doctor. And that is, for doctors to use. Now, when they get the report back, they would see your report based on one of the reports that your doctor wants to look at. So it can be male hormone health, or it can be nutrigenomic, or it can be cognitive. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that, and I'm not going to use you as an example, I'll use myself as an example. Let's say I do the DNA test and I do the cognitive panel. And based on that, I have a genetic predisposition. There's a gene called APOE4. APOE4, it shows that somebody's more likely, even 50% more likely, to develop Alzheimer's. Okay, so we can sit there and say, shit, I'm going to have Alzheimer's. But then you can go in and say, what are some of the things that cause Alzheimer's? Well, a lot of it has to do with inflammation. So you have this inflammation that creates beta amyloid plaque, the same exact beta amyloid plaque as in our heart when we in our heart arteries, when our arteries get hardened and they have to put a stent. So that's what happens in our brain as well. That beta amyloid plaque gets in our brain. So if we know this about ourselves early enough, there are things that we can do to take action. So some of those things are, what about the food that we put in our bodies? The food that prevents us from having that beta amyloid plaque. What about other inflammatory things that we can add to our bodies? What about supplementation? Certain supplementation will help us, like curcumin, et cetera, that'll help us reduce inflammation. What about lifestyle modifications? Exercise, cold, hot, red light therapy, all these different things are part of the treatment that we can have as part of a lifestyle to help us prevent that expression of that gene that we talked about that has to do with Alzheimer's. So these are the things that are really important to know about ourselves. I'll give you another example. So, and part of it in the sick care model is part of it is ourselves. And what I mean about that, we're pain averse. So when Uncle Marv goes to the doctor and says, I got a pain in my elbow, doctor goes, oh man, were you playing tennis or something like that? No, I just got a pain in my elbow. Well, Uncle Marv, I can give you an injection in your elbow to take away the pain, or I can give you a pill for that. Great, took away the pain. You're happy because you don't like to feel pain. The doctor is like, I did my job. Do no harm. And we'll put a little asterisk there.
Okay.
And then the second one is, I addressed the symptom that you said you had. Now, what we didn't get to is the why. Why does your elbow hurt? You weren't playing tennis. You didn't hit it or anything. There is a signal. The pain is giving you a signal that something is going on. So you have to follow that pain to see what is happening. Now, one of the things that could be happening is this whole fight or flight stress. And what happens is, let's say that I'm walking down the street, a car comes out of nowhere, almost hits me. Now, I'm going to have the fight, flight, or freeze experience, but my neurochemistry is going to release. So my neurochemicals are my dopamine, my adrenaline, my converted norepinephrine, my cortisol. All that is released into my bloodstream. Now, when my brain realizes there's no lion chasing me, I am safe, it's going to reuptake those neurochemicals and release other neurochemicals to get me back to what's called homeostasis or balance. Now, if I have a certain genotype, there's a gene called Fa, fatty acid amine hydrolase. There's no test after this, so you don't have to remember this, but there's a
Good.
gene. So what this gene shows us is it metabolizes one of those neurochemicals that gets us back to balance much quicker than other people. So if that's the case, you're actually not producing enough of your own endogenous, that means we produce ourselves, endogenous endocannabinoid or neurochemical. So that cortisol stays longer in our bloodstream. And when it stays longer in our bloodstream, your immune system can overreact to that. So the over response to that cortisol is pain and inflammation. So your pain in your elbow could be that stress hormone is sitting in your bloodstream longer. And if you're predisposed to gut health issues like IBD, et cetera, it could actually trigger that as well. So now you have some gut health issues that are going on. And you're trying to figure out, what did I eat today? I don't know, my stomach feels a little bit upset, but it may have to do with all that cortisol and that immune system overreacting to that. So all you have to know is you have a genetic predisposition to that neurochemical. So what can I do to stimulate exogenously with supplements, with herbs, with other medications? What can I do to make sure that I supplement what I'm naturally deficient in so I can have my body back in homeostasis and balance?
Okay. Now, let me take a step back because, again, you had a lot of information there and a lot of things that I, as a normal person, I'm not going to be able to process all that. I'm not going to be able to go back and connect the dots with, yeah, a car almost hit me. I got scared. I tweaked. I've got cortisol. A lot of this feels like there's testing that has to be done. And a lot of that testing is not something that we could do on our own. And it's not something that if we go to our regular doctors, they're going to have access to. So how do we at least start with that? And then I want to ask you how we got here.
Yeah, I mean, your doctor can definitely do a DNA panel on you and then look at an epigenetic panel. They can get it from us or, other companies that do that. And a lot of doctors now are looking at genetics, and if they're not, that's something you may want to have a conversation with your doctor about.
But would that be a general practitioner doctor would have access to that?
Any doctor can get a DNA test. Yes.
Okay.
General practitioners, you don't have to be a specialist. There's direct to consumer companies that do, DNA testing. We have one test that goes direct to consumer because it's not prescribed by a doctor. But even if you've taken like a 23andMe or an Ancestry.com, they don't particularly test for some of those conditions, but we can still use raw data from that DNA test and upload it into the platform and, get some of those answers to the questions that we have as well.
Okay. So now let's take a step back because we just downloaded a whole bunch of information for people. What I like to do is understand, how did we get here? Mm-hmm. So in terms of your story, my first thought is I don't think many people grow up wanting to get into, DNA and all of these things. So how did you end up here? I mean, let's start with, was there something in your life that kind of triggered your interest?
Yeah, well, so I'm an immigrant. I was born in Lithuania, and I immigrated to the U.S. when I was about 6 years old. My family moved to Philadelphia. And when I learned the language and I went to school, I was the kind of kid that would sit in class. The teacher would call me and I wasn't paying attention. My brain would be elsewhere. And at some point I became disruptive because I was just not interested. And, I would get in trouble, and my parents started the process of seeing what's wrong with me and taking me to doctors, and I got diagnosed with ADD. Now, back in the day, I'm in my mid-50s right now. So back in the day, there was ADD and there was ADHD, and I wasn't the hyperactive kid, so I was just a daydreaming kind of kid. If I can describe it to people, it'd be like if you have a whole bunch of browser windows open at the same time, and you're going from one browser to the next window to the next window, that's what goes on in my head. And I was diagnosed with ADD, and I was put on prescription medication. I can't say it didn't work for me particularly. It depends how you define work. It did allow me to focus, but it removed my entire sense of self. So wasn't really happy, wasn't really sad, just kind of go through the motions.
I was going to say, if you were in your 50s, that was the type of time that they were giving drugs that pretty much just mellowed you out, made you drowsy, right?
I think it was Ritalin or one of those
Yep,
kind of
Ritalin.
drugs,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. But, the funny thing is that the drugs that are supposed to mellow you out, they're actually giving you a stimulant. So because your body creates more serotonin, so it's serotonin inhibitors, basically, if you look at them. And what happens is ADD. First of all, there's a genotype for that. It's genetic with a bunch of different caveats to that. And what happens is you're born with the depletion of dopamine. So your brain is always looking for the next hit of dopamine. And because you're not being interested in whatever work, whatever the teacher is talking about, your brain's trying to find what else you're interested in. So you can hyper focus really well, or you can multitask, or you have these squirrel moments constantly if you don't have the right system in place. So I took these medications and then I was going to, I think it was ninth grade, if I remember. It was some older kids I was hanging out with, and they asked me if I wanted to smoke a cigarette. I was like, yeah, sure. Get to hang out with the older kids. I could smoke a cigarette because smoking was cool back in the day. And I would smoke a cigarette, and they only had one cigarette. I never questioned why, but they had one. So they ended up passing the cigarette around to me. I took a drag of it. Didn't taste like a cigarette, and I was already dabbling in cigarettes at that time. And took another one. They're laughing. I'm like, what? They put cannabis into the cigarette. So when I went back to class, my windows over my head started narrowing, and I could focus. So I didn't tell anybody, but I gave up my prescription medication, and cannabis became my go-to medicine. My parents weren't really keen on that.
I was going to say, that was not acceptable back in the day.
Especially with immigrant parents. They're like, oh, they can understand that. No difference. They didn't understand anything between it's heroin and cannabis were the same category. They had no
drugs.
No clue.
A drug's a drug.
A drug is a drug. Yeah, it's Nancy Reagan, your brain on drugs time and all that. So I would get in trouble and all that stuff. And when I was just about 18, my parents ended up calling the cops on me, try to have me arrested for cannabis, for my medicine, and then kicking me out of the house. I didn't speak to them for years, but the irony of this is my parents consume products that my company has patents on for different conditions now with phytocannabinoids. And then, I speak to them every day now. So our relationship completely changed. But, went through this homeless thing. I got, and had a little bit of money, like $500 saved in the car. So I got some hotel rooms, and then I couch surfed at a bunch of people's homes of friends and girls and all this other stuff. And I kept getting, he's got to go. So my grandmother let me stay on her couch for a while. And I'm a big music person. So I was going to this place called Tower Records. You and I probably remember Tower Records. The young people are like, what's a record? I don't know.
Physical stores with big old LPs.
Exactly. So I got a job at Tower Records, and I entered university, and I was working in Tower Records as I was going to college. I went to physical therapy school. And as I, met my girlfriend, and I started an internet company. I exited out of that. I met my girlfriend, who was now my ex-wife, and she said I had to get a real job. So I went to work for a company called Price Waterhouse at the time. Then I worked for a venture capital company. Then I became a commercial real estate broker. I'm going to fast forward really quickly and moved from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. And I was sitting in the real estate office trying to figure out what I wanted to do. This was like 2009. Market's dead, 2010. And these guys came into the office and wanted to open up an alternative pharmacy. And everybody was like, what do these guys want? We don't understand. So they had me talk to them, and they ended up wanting to open up a cannabis dispensary in California. So said, yeah, sure. Where's your paperwork? I know you have to be compliant and all that stuff. They didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, well, I'll help you. I'll help you get a place, but I'll help you get, properly organized, which I did. And they offered me a partnership. They just asked me if I wanted to come in. So I became a partner and we opened up 4 dispensaries under the same brand. But one of the things I kept seeing is 2 people will consume the same varietal of cannabis and have a complete different experience. So my ADD kicked in. I started researching and I found a video of the scientists sequencing the actual plant genetically. So I reached out to them. Long story, a little bit longer. I ended up consulting with that company. They taught me how to extract DNA from plants. I traveled around the country, got plant material, brought it back to my lab, extracted the DNA from the plant, and we started the first library of plants, cannabis plants, and put on the blockchain. And we could see whatever they're calling these plants. It doesn't matter. It's what the material is. And the parent company of the company that I was consulting with, they were doing something called pharmacogenomics testing. And pharmacogenomics is a study of how drugs affect individual bodies and how drugs can interact with each other, so contraindications. So I really got into human genetics. And I had a light bulb moment one day, so that we have plant material here, we have human DNA here. Since we have both DNAs, let's bring those 2 together and help guide people to a more personalized experience with their phytocannabinoid use. They had no interest in it. They actually shut down the human side. So I got some really smart scientists and opened up my company in 2017. And our first test was an endocannabinoid system test. It was a test to see how people react to different phytocannabinoids. And we got a patent on the use of DNA to make recommendations associated with the endocannabinoid system. So that was our first foray into genetic testing.
Okay. So let me ask this and see how this connects the dots. So you smoked weed before you went to school. These guys walked into your office while you were out in California asking you to do a weed thing. Did you keep up with the weed throughout that whole time, going to school and grad school and work and all of that? And that's how they knew to seek you out, or did you just get lucky?
Yeah, I mean, a combination of both. I think luck is an interesting word, because I think you kind of create your own luck, or you are aware when there's a situation that is timely and you just have to act. So yeah, I consume cannabis. Cannabis is my medicine still. I don't consume during the day, usually at night, or I have a certain formulation, and also CBD that's not intoxicating. So I have a formulation I take to help me focus during the day, and then some to help me, kind of calm at night. So yeah, I did consume cannabis. I do consume cannabis, and spoke around the world on the effects of the endocannabinoid system and what cannabis does. But I think it could have been anybody, but it just happened to be that I was interested in that subject, and I saw the opportunity, and I went for the opportunity. I could have continued to operate dispensaries, but to me, I'm really focused on the medical aspects of the plant, and just plant medicine, and like I said, precision medicine anyway. And I found it fascinating. Like, the thing that really got me, there was a guy that was working in our shop. And he was one of the investors or owners in one of the shops, and he wanted to consume some cannabis. So I said, yeah, I mean, we have this sativa dominant hybrid, or with the sativa. And I don't know if you know the difference, sativa and indica.
I know the name sativa. I have no idea what
Yeah.
it means, though.
So there's really no such thing anymore, but sativa gives you the boost up. It has a
Okay.
little bit of dopamine kind of properties to it. And an indica is actually more calming, sedative. It helps you to sleep and relax, etc. So when I said, we have this, he said, no. He goes, I can't consume that. It puts me to sleep. I was like, well, what do you mean? It's indica is indica. That's supposed to be sedative, and sativa is supposed to give you an up. He goes, not for me. It works differently for me. So that was my moment. I was like, well, wait a second. We consume the same thing, but it affects you differently than me. So that's sort of started my journey along that route.
Okay. So this is going to be a side question, because I want to tie in a little bit of the health aspect. Throughout this time, were you having any discussion with traditional medicine as we know it. I know that as you were being diagnosed with the ADD and the ADHD, that wasn't working and cannabis did for you, but
Yeah.
did that kind of take you off the path of traditional medicine, or did you go back and forth with anything? And that's where we're going to hit pause for today's show. We've covered a lot of ground from DNA and epigenetics to the endocannabinoid system, AI, and how all of that ties into our everyday health. If your brain is full right now, that's exactly why we're breaking this into 2 parts. So in part 2, we're going to shift gears. We'll dig into Len's personal journey, his growing up, getting labeled with ADD, and how cannabis ended up helping him more than traditional meds. And then we'll look at the winding road that led him into genetics and building EndoDNA. It's a powerful story that really connects the science to real life. So we'll stop here for now. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of this episode with Len May. Thanks for listening to the Unhealthy Podcast, and I'll catch you in part 2.